Here we are. We're going to get started in a minute or two with questions for investigations. The subject we're going to start with today, just because of some questions that came in by email earlier, has to do with relationship investigations. I have a question about an online romance scam, how to discover online cheating, a couple other questions that may be of interest. So we'll get started with that momentarily. After we get through the first few questions about relationship investigations, we can look at some other topics if emails come in. So the first one we'll start with is, and a lot of what we'll cover today has to do with doing some of the investigating on your own in advance of hiring a private investigator. There's things that we can do as an agency that you may not be able to do, but there's a lot that you can do in advance to get some basic details on a relationship investigation. Usually the question that comes to us when we get involved is just to confirm what the client already knows. A lot of times the client already either believes or is pretty certain that their relationship partner is being unfaithful, or that there's another relationship going on, and you just want to confirm it. You just want proof, because if you're going to take action based on that belief, you want to make sure it's correct. You don't want to base it on something that you're pretty sure of but not 100%. So a lot of the verification can make it easier to make a decision or not. So the first question, and then we'll get into some specific details. It has to do with, what if you are a victim of an online romance scam, right? Where somebody pretends to be interested in you for a relationship, and usually it's all online, and they'll talk to you as a relationship partner for weeks or months, and then typically it progresses into asking you for money. They'll ask you to send them funds either through PayPal or Venmo or some other method. The client we talked to this week actually asked the victim to purchase things from a certain store, right? And it turns out that this store was really just a merchant account for this other fake relationship. The client was in the U.S. This relationship partner, supposedly she was in Europe. It's unknown really where she was, but she took thousands of dollars by claiming that she needed money for travel, needed money for purchasing items. And then at some point it just went dark when there was no more money coming. So the question is, how can you recover your money? And the first thing to do is look at the methods of payment that were used. If it was a merchant account, you can probably dispute payments with your bank. If it was PayPal or Venmo or some other source, the first thing to do is to use that information along with the email and phone numbers, or however you contacted the person, to identify the actual party behind this fraud, right? You want to identify the person who is really behind this scam. A lot of times they hide behind fake names, fake social media accounts, and there's ways that you can discover really who is behind it. And that's one of the first steps. Once you find that, then you can find out where the assets are of that person that you may be able to recover. We'll talk a little bit about identifying possible scammers using photos and pictures that we can, we'll talk about a little later when it comes to trying to find if a certain person is participating in online relationships as part of a cheating scam. So if you suspect that a person you are engaging with online is either not who they say they are or they start asking for money, you may want to get some verification of their identity, maybe some pictures, prove the photos are real by having something included in that photo that's recent. Obviously, the stereotype or the punchline for it is today's newspaper, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be something else. It could be holding up a note, a message to you. There's a lot of tools that you can use online to make fake profiles, pictures of somebody who's not real. It's using artificial intelligence. You want to make sure that you're eliminating somebody who's not a real, actual person. So if you're manipulated to send funds to a potential relationship partner, it may not be an actual person. It could be a group of people. A lot of times these scammers operate in teams where they have a computer room where multiple people are talking back and forth, and they use that to solicit funds from people who are looking for a relationship online. So that would be the first subject. Related to that is, if you are in a real world relationship and you suspect that somebody is having a relationship outside of your primary couple, couple ways to look at that. First of all, if somebody is soliciting relationships online, or if they are involved in relationships, typically they will use online dating platforms, and they're not going to make that obvious to you. One really neat trick you can use to flush those out is if you go to any of the online platforms, whether it's Match, OkCupid, any of the online dating platforms, and try to sign up for it with your partner's email address. If they're already there with an account, it'll say there's already an account with that email address. All right, now you may not be able to see the account or see the profile, but you'll know that that email address has already been used. Now, in theory, it could be something from many years ago, but usually these are purged after a certain period of time so that they may not be active. That email may not be active if it hasn't been used in a year or two. So the first thing to do is go to the 3 or 4 or 5 various online dating platforms and try to sign up with your partner's email address and see what happens. If they have an account there, it'll tell you can't sign up with that email because it's already being used. Another way, if you suspect that that's the case, or you find that that's the case, that you can maybe find where that information is held. A lot of times, if you're in a close relationship, you'll have access to the person's mobile device, their phone, their tablet, their cell phone. And if that's the case, what you can do is, you may not see that app on the screen of the phone, right? It's not going to be on the home screen. But if you search through, we've seen this in many times in relationship investigations, folders where they're hidden apps inside folders. That's assuming that the person doesn't have a second phone or a burner phone. But if you have their primary phone, which a lot of times that's the only thing they'll carry around, look for that app in folders where it won't be readily visible. Search through all those folders to see what's listed in that folder. There are even some apps where you can hide any app underneath something innocuous like a calculator or a calendar. So click on all those to see if there's anything underneath some of those basic apps that are there. Obviously, that'll require you to have access to the phone and make sure that you get good legal advice. You're not doing anything illegal like hacking or invasion of privacy or identity theft when you're doing these things. But look for those hidden apps in folders. Another method that you could use to discover infidelity or cheating is kind of similar to the sign up email. If you think that a person may have an account and the sign up email maybe has a hit, Another way to do it is to go to a dating app or multiple dating apps and put in that you lost your password and you want to reset the password. It'll ask you for your email. Put in the email of the person you suspect is using this app when you are in the same location that they are in. When it goes to reset an email, it normally will send a text. So if you go to do a lost password and then you see the person's phone buzz or beep, you know that might be part of that same process. So when you're in the same room as that person or you're spending time with that person, go ahead and try to reset a password for them that might trigger their phone to have some kind of activity on it. Is another way to try to flush that out. Another very common method to locate if you know somebody has an account and you want to see if you can find information on it is to do a picture search. So if you go to any of the online dating sites and you find a photo, if you right click the photo, it'll bring up a menu item that says search for this picture in Google, and it'll tell you other places that it's found. So you may find a cross-reference to social media and a dating site or two different social media sites. At least it'll tell you if the picture is real and it's not artificial intelligence. When we get inquiries from clients about relationship investigations, a lot of times they come in waves during certain events or certain time of year. One of the most common is right after a major holiday. Valentine's Day, Christmas are the first two that come up, where if the person is in a primary relationship and they have something on the side, they will probably not be able to spend time with this other relationship on the primary holiday, Christmas or Valentine's Day or whatever it is. But they'll usually try to make up for it or want to be with that person the day after or the day before. Usually it's the day after. And so look for suspicious activity on days that are immediately after a major holiday, or look for activity on or around that person's birthday, right? So if it's your spouse or partner's birthday, that other person may want to celebrate with them on a day or right around there. So look for activity, suspicious trips, travel, maybe not available for 4 or 5 hours, where they don't answer their phone. And those days are most common because a person will do everything they can to try to make up for it. Think about the point of view of the other relationship partner, right? They're probably not happy that their supposed boyfriend or girlfriend is in a relationship. So they're going to be hounding them about spending time on or around that holiday. So they're going to do everything they can to make time for them at some point before or after that. You can also look at around those times mileage on the odometer. So if somebody says, I'm just running to the store down the street, but they put 80 miles on their car, well, then, you know something is going on. A lot of times that can help give you a radius of where the person's travel is going to by dividing that mileage by 2. If they put 80 miles on their car, it's 40 miles there, 40 miles back. What is about 40 miles away? It may be, the person you suspect might be somebody that you're aware of. It might be a coworker, it might be a friend or an associate. And if you suspect that person, you can see if that mileage matches up. Another thing you can do, it gets back to the holidays. If you suspect that a potential person is in a relationship with your partner, if you can find out their birthday, then you can see if your spouse, significant other, tries to get away around that time to spend time with them on their birthday, because it won't be a conflict like a holiday would be, Valentine's Day or Christmas or New Year's. Their birthday won't be a conflict with your birthday, presumably, because they're, chances are 1 in 365 that it'll be the same day. So that might be a way to try to discover those types of activities. Another investigative mechanism that we came across accidentally many years ago was what's called a circle back, where we had many times a client would contact us and hire us to do an investigation on their partner. And we would do an investigation. We would follow them. They would go to the gym, go to work. They would do everything that our client said they were supposed to do. Our client would say, watch out for Joe. Joe is going to the gym, and I think he's going somewhere else. I think he's meeting up with somebody. I don't think he's really going to the gym. Okay. So we followed him. Sure enough, 3 or 4 times in a row, they go to the gym. And usually, if somebody has suspicion, at least one of the times it will be true. But sometimes we would find that it wouldn't be true after weeks. And our client would still want to keep doing this, still want to keep spending money and doing surveillance and watching the client. And at one point, one of our investigators, on a hunch, did something different. What they did was, during that time, they checked in on our client. And it turns out that the client was using our investigation to make sure that their partner was actually away where they're supposed to be so that they could do something wrong, right? They were away from the house. So because of that, we suggest that if you are suspicious of somebody in a relationship, create and contrive some opportunity where they're going to have uninhibited time to themselves, right? Tell them you're going to be away for 5 hours. You're going to go, to meet somebody, go to dinner with somebody for 5 or 6 hours. You're going to the movies. Make up something that's ironclad and solid to where you're going to be away. Give them the chance to do something that they're trying to make time to do, and then circle back, right? And then come back to the house where they're supposed to be, maybe go to their job where they're supposed to be, because if you give them an opportunity, which they may not have that many, to do something wrong, that may be a place and a method to be able to catch them, especially if you give them some advance notice. If you give them 4 or 5 days or weeks notice that you're going to be away, that gives them time to make plans rather than if it's last minute. So that circle back method, again, get good legal advice, make sure you're not stalking anybody or doing anything illegal. But these are some tools you can use on your own to at least start the process of identifying if there's a possibility of another relationship. And then, of course, if you need an investigation to document that, that could be done. But this will kind of give you a head start on that process. What do you do about activity that can't be documented? Somebody disappears and they don't answer their phone. They don't respond to text. If you know where they're supposed to be, obviously you can go check out that spot. If you don't have that opportunity to do that, you can do other things like look at the GPS on their car. Maybe they put in an address. The GPS is not going to show their whole route in like breadcrumbs, but it will show you if they typed in an address. Maybe they put in an address of a restaurant. Maybe they put an address in of a movie theater or someplace they were going to go. You may find that it's in a place where they weren't necessarily declaring to you that they were going to be. Sometimes if that is deleted, there are ways you can recover electronic data from a GPS and even from phones and other devices. So you can check out our website at activeintel.com to see if there are ways to recover hidden or deleted electronic data from certain electronic devices that might be helpful to you if it's legal. So that's a good start on different types of relationship questions that have come up. See if there's anything else in the meantime. Yeah, one other question comes up is, what is the legality of using a GPS device on a car? That's something different. You don't want to go placing hidden GPS trackers on somebody else's car. In almost every state, that's illegal. And you can actually have some pretty serious consequences for doing that. A lot of times these are discovered accidentally if they fall off, if the car breaks down and the mechanic looks at it. There's a lot of ways they can be discovered, and you don't want to be doing something illegal just to find out information that you can find other ways. GPS tracking, even if the car belongs to you, there's been court cases that have come up where somebody owned the car and somebody else was using it, and they put a GPS tracker on their own car, and come to find out that was deemed to be illegal by the courts because the person had a expectation of privacy. Even if it wasn't their car, they weren't thinking somebody's going to be tracking them around. So be careful of that. You want to get good legal advice if you're going to use any kind of GPS devices. Now, if you're a business owner or somebody that puts a tracking device on the car and discloses that to employees or other people using the car, that's a different story. That's usually something that has been found to be legal. Again, get good legal advice if you're going to take any of those activities of tracking or following somebody around, because you don't want to get yourself in trouble for doing that. See if there's any other questions related to that relationship subject. Yeah, one question has to do with text messages. If text messages are sent using other apps besides the basic text on the phone, can those be tracked? And the answer is yes. A lot of times those apps, even if they're hidden or deleted, you can recover data from those apps even after the fact. A lot of times deleted really doesn't mean deleted. It just means it's removed from the screen, but it's still either in the phone or sometimes in the cloud where they can be recovered. And they can show the date and times of those texts, even attachments. If there was photos or other files attached, it can show those attachments. In many cases, if you think, using that same methodology, if you think that somebody is using a hidden or alternate method of texting, you can use that same email method of flushing that out. Go to one of the hidden text apps, WhatsApp or any of the other ones, and try to sign up for it using the known party's email address, right? And see if an account shows up, right? They already have an account. And if they do, now you know that app's being used. And if it's not on their phone, then where is it? So there's a lot of things you can do yourself to start that investigation. We're going to switch gears briefly. We'll probably get more into this next week, but we want to start the process this week to talk about corporate fraud and embezzlement. A lot of our cases are when an owner or an executive in a corporation will suspect that somebody's stealing money from their company. And what they'll do is, rather than contact their accountant or CEO or bookkeeper, they'll start an investigation, because you don't know exactly where that investigation is going to go. It may be that the bookkeeper is in on it. It may be that maybe they're not directly in on it, but they're doing something wrong that allows it to happen. We've seen cases where an actual accountant or CFO was embezzling money, but only because the bookkeeper was doing something improper, not necessarily in on the embezzlement, but they were, just giving the mail to the bookkeeper, to the accountant without opening it, or allowing checks to go through without verifying it. And because they're afraid for their job, they may not participate in an investigation thoroughly, where they might try to hide things or destroy evidence. So a lot of times the owner or their corporate counsel will come to us to look at records in a company to see if there are things that could indicate some type of fraud or embezzlement or misuse of company funds, or even misuse of company assets. Sometimes it's not the money that's being taken, it's assets. Could be intellectual property, could be inventory, could even be employees. So the way we normally start that is by getting basic account information for a chart of accounts, a profit and loss statement, monthly expense reports, and looking for any anomalies, any places where the percentages as a cost of sale are higher or lower than they should be. And once those anomalies are located, that's where you can look to see where the fraud might be happening. And again, we'll dive more into this next week. But there's a couple clients that want to at least get some basic information. That's the place to start. It doesn't have to be anything that's obtrusive. You don't have to do interviews with people. You don't have to, shake up the tree so people get scared. You can actually just get copies of normal reports that you would have, KPI reports, spreadsheets, any kind of reports that show the profit and loss of a company or the line items for expenses will show some red flags. And the red flags are percentages that are too high or too low. And you might think, well, what if the expense is too low? How does that show fraud? Well, it can show fraud because what that might mean is the profit is too high. And sometimes people will overdo profit to try to shuffle money somewhere. So anything that's out of norm, high or low, is a place to first start looking. I'll tell you one quick story. We had a case where the CFO of a company came to us and suspected fraud. Didn't know exactly where it was, but there were numbers that were off and there was money that was missing. And we went through the numbers and everything seemed legit. All the checks were signed properly. All the vendors were checked out. That's the first thing we'll do is we'll check ghost vendors to make sure that somebody's not sending payable checks to a fake shell company just to divert money from the enterprise. All that checked out. And as we were checking through those vendors, we found that we go through each one just to make sure it's a real company, a real vendor. It's not just a PO box collecting checks. And as we're going through one of them, the vendor, in passing to our investigator, mentioned, I thought it was weird because a couple months after we got the check, this was for a trade show, we were wondering why they would order this item from us because it was included with the trade show. And that was their scheme. What they were doing is they were going to trade shows and getting expense checks for the trade show and the display and the booths and all the marketing materials. But all of that was included. They were buying an all-inclusive package from the venue, from the convention center. So they were getting 2 payments sent out. The payments all went to legitimate vendors. So the vendors themselves weren't, ghost vendors or illegitimate. And they had this complicated scheme where after the convention was over, they never actually ordered delivery from these third-party vendors. They had it included with this trade show package. And they would go back to the vendors and either get a refund or, so there wouldn't be any checks or any paper trail, they would actually get a credit from that vendor that they would resell to other people they knew in the business. So for example, if you were a printing company that printed up brochures, you might get $2,000 or $3,000 for brochures or for marketing materials. And after the show, when it was never ordered, they would just say, well, give me a credit. And then they would sell that credit to some other company. And it was a very convoluted, scam that the person was doing. And they were stealing, $3,000 or $4,000 a month over the course of several years. And it wasn't a lot of money. And this was a person that made several $100,000 a year. But their monthly expenses for their personal overhead was short by a few grand a month. So this is how they made up the difference. And like many other frauds, the biggest loss to the company wasn't necessarily the money. It was having to lose that person because it was their top salesperson and they were responsible for 20 or 30% of their revenue. So it was a big loss to find out that was the person. And usually that's the case. It's a very high trustworthy person in the company that's stealing money, and it's a big loss. But the bottom line is that unless you catch it early, it could escalate. And we'll talk about another case next week where there was a town in Illinois, Dixon, Illinois, where the bookkeeper of a relatively small town stole $50 million over 15, 20 years. And that's another good case example of eliminating fraud. See if we have any more questions about any subject. I have a question from somebody we're doing an asset search for that wants to know how to read a bank account search report. Briefly, we'll cover that. initials J, so you know who we're talking about. But this goes for anybody. If we prepare or you obtain a bank account report, bank account search report, the things you'll see on it is the name of the financial institution, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, either the entire account number or a truncated account number, meaning that it might leave off the last 4 digits. And we'll talk about how to deal with that momentarily. And usually it'll have a recent balance, either current within a day or two, or the last recorded statement balance within the last 30 days. And in most cases, the bank account search report will also show some recent transactions. Check number 1234 for this much money, deposit of $5,200, whatever it is, some recent activities on that account. It may not show the payee or the name of the person on the check, but it'll show some recent activity. And if you can get 2 or 3 of them, sometimes it'll show you their payroll, right? If you show the same deposit every week, $482.12, $482.12 every week on a Friday, that's probably a payroll, and that could be some good information. But when you're reading that report, a few things to come to mind. First of all, take those balances with a grain of salt, because sometimes it's a snapshot on a particular day, and sometimes accounts can fluctuate up and down. So if you have a judgment of, let's say, $25,000, and you see an account balance of only $5,000, you still want to do your writ of garnishment for the whole amount. You don't want to do the lower amount, because when you put in your writ of garnishment, there could be $50,000 in that account. You never know. And the other thing is, if the bank account search report does not have the full account number, that's okay. You can do one of 2 things. If you do a writ of garnishment, again, you may need legal advice, and an attorney will probably have to do this with the court. When you do that writ of garnishment, you don't have to put an account number. You put the depositor's name, their tax ID number, social security number for a person, EIN number for a company, and attach the judgment to it. And there'll be instructions. Your attorney will tell you how to do that. Any account at that institution will be there. And it's important to not put an account number, because sometimes if a person has multiple accounts at a bank, maybe only the primary account will show on a bank account search. The other ones might be sub-accounts, and they may not show on a bank account search. So if you just put one account number, you won't garnish any assets from the other accounts. So you want to just leave it open-ended. We also recommend, if you're submitting writ of garnishment, since you're already doing one, if you add a few other banks that are local to the area and submit them to those banks, even if you haven't found an account number, sometimes you may discover hidden accounts that way. If a person has a joint account, that's something that could be an issue with the financial institution. The banks, according to what attorneys tell us, if a properly formatted writ of garnishment hits the bank to recover funds, the bank is not supposed to disclose that to the depositor until after the garnishment has been completed. However, if there's an error on that writ of garnishment and they reject it, there is some gray area. Again, this is what attorneys tell us, where they may be able to notify their depositor that, hey, somebody tried to get money from your account, but we rejected it because it was no good. And then they could take action on hiding those funds again. So make sure that you double, triple check that writ of garnishment to make sure it's good when it gets to the financial institution, so that it doesn't get rejected and somebody at the bank doesn't accidentally notify the depositor that somebody's trying to get their funds. So that's a good question about how to read those reports. And, when you're doing a bank account search, we recommend also looking at other asset classes. If you're looking at real estate, you may find references to financial institutions on a title search for a property, because there may be notaries that work at a bank that sign some documents. There may be mortgages. There may be lien references. There may be other claims on real estate, UCC filings that reference other financial institutions that borrower is related to. So don't overlook references to other banks in other assets, even vehicles, right? If a person has a car loan, they may get it from their bank or credit union. A person has an aircraft. They're probably going to get their aircraft financing through a known financial institution. Sometimes a financial institution will require that you open a deposit account for certain types of loans. So we recommend not overlooking those other searches, because you may find other banks and financial institutions that have references. We found, even in one case, it was a boat, a vessel that had a finance hold on it. It wasn't actually a lien. It was more like a UCC filing from a financial institution. It was a brokerage account, like TD Ameritrade or Charles Schwab, that type of institution. And the reason why is because the financial institution wrote the check to purchase that vessel. And because of the fact that the person had used their brokerage account to fund that purchase, the brokerage account put a notice on that check, and it was attached to the closing statement of that boat. And that financial account would not have been discovered were it not for the vessel search. It was a Coast Guard documented vessel. It would not have been discovered because of the way it was vested. It was a brokerage account, and it was not attached directly to the Social Security number of that borrower. So don't overlook other sources of that. Even social media. We've seen on social media where people have posted pictures of a check that they wrote and just blocked off the account number and blurred out the name of the payee to show something off, and they've seen a check. We've seen social media where somebody has gone to a dealership and bought a car, and the dealership was a source of information using a subpoena to find out where they wrote the check from, where they financed it, what their insurance company is. So don't overlook other sources of financial records that sometimes are quicker and cheaper than a full-blown bank account search. So good, we're going to keep it kind of short this week. It's a holiday week. If you have more questions about relationship investigations or embezzlement investigations, don't forget to email help@activeintel.com. You can email questions that we'll cover on our next live video. And don't forget to click the subscribe button. You'll get a notice when the next live video comes out. Do about one a week. Next week we'll probably do it midweek, maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, but make sure you click the live button, because sometimes it's last minute when we're in between cases and in between meetings. And if you have any questions, you can reach our website activeintel.com or schedule a consultation at teleclient.com.